With me now to discuss is a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Joel Griffith. Welcome, Joel.
Hey, thank you for having me tonight.
So President Trump, as we heard yesterday, is calling off negotiations for a large relief package, and he instead wants Congress to focus on targeted relief actions for struggling industries, paycheck protection programs, etc., direct payments. But we see House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is saying no, it's all or nothing. She wants multi-trillions of dollars for a package. So do you agree with the president that she's acting in bad faith since the election is so close?
Well, I think we need to keep the focus on the fact that the strength of our recovery will not be determined by the size of any checks from Washington, whether it's the smaller proposal by some in the Senate or whether it's the even larger proposal by the House of Representatives. Our economy will not fully recover until people are free and willing to return to most activities. And the fact is, if you look across the country, there's a big disparity. You have left-leaning governors that still have their economy shuttered, and meanwhile, you have a lot of red states that have reopened. And if you look at unemployment in places in Utah, in places in Idaho, it's almost non-existent. It's under 3%. You go to places like California and some of those cities, you're approaching 1 in 4. We need to reopen our society and allow people to get back to work, to school, to church, and to synagogue.
So to that point, one of the big sticking points we're seeing between the White House and congressional Republicans in their face-off, standoff, whatever you want to call it, against congressional Democrats is this idea of bailout money, slush fund money for, as you were saying, these Democrat-run cities and states, the ones who have gone into extreme lockdowns, more so than any other places with similar-sized populations. We saw South Dakota didn't lock down, and they're completely fine. They didn't all die, though all the doomsday prediction models said that they were all going to die of COVID, and however they were able to handle it in a responsible and reasonable manner without destroying their economy. So when it comes to this, do you have any concerns that the House Speaker is trying to use these funds to create slush funds for state employees, for these big unions that will then give kickbacks to Democrat politicians?
Oh, I have many concerns. I mean, we're facing right now, we have millions of Americans concentrated in these states that are shut down, that are still without work. And then you have politicians that are trying to use this as a chance to really put their hand into the national piggy bank and go ahead and hand that out to their special interest groups and to bail out some of these left-leaning cities and states that have mismanaged their budget for decades. They're trying to use this as a massive bailout. And that's on top of these states that are using the pandemic as an excuse to grab and concentrate government power. It's a shame. We need to follow the model that we see being done in Florida and places like Georgia, where they're allowing people to go back to work, to go back to school, and to get back to their lives.
And so one of the other things we're seeing from congressional or House Democrats is they also want to expand the enhanced unemployment checks, $600 a week for about 70% or so of unemployed people from the pandemic who are receiving those checks. They're now making more unemployment than they were when they were actually working. And we see now Democrats, they want to extend that. Republicans want to scale that back so it'll entice people to return to work. So thinking of this, do you have any fears that the Democrats, that these checks make it so that a lot of these Americans won't get back to work, the economy will stagnate before the election, and therefore more Democrats could then win election?
Well, we know for a fact that these enhanced unemployment benefits, like you mentioned, 70% of people were earning more off the job than on the job. We know that that was a big disincentive to returning to work. Now, early on in the crisis, it's understandable that we wanted to go ahead and get aid to the many millions, more than 20 million that were unemployed. We're 6 months into this now. Many states have returned to nearly normal. We mentioned several states that actually have unemployment rates well under 5%. So to go ahead and continue these unemployment benefits at a multiple of what people earning before, that is not proper. And sure, you might score some short-term political points, but you're going to be harming the broader economy, and you're actually going to be harming those that are disincentivized to work, because many of them are those that need to build that experience, and now they're going to have an extended gap on their resume. That's not fair to the taxpayer, and that's not fair to the people that they're intending to help. We need to have aid targeted to those who actually need it in a temporary manner, not these massive stimulus programs, whether it's unemployment benefits or checks to everybody across the country.
And speaking of it not being fair, a few months ago when they passed, I believe it was the CARES Act, it was over $2 trillion. Depending on how you look at it, it could be more like over $6 trillion. And that all adds up to our federal deficit. That's growing at an accelerated rate. And when we look down the line, what will that mean for example, my generation moving forward with such a massive debt on our shoulders, and especially because we haven't even spent all the money from just a few months ago when the president signed that bill?
When we see these trillions of dollars that are added to our deficit, and that's both Republicans and Democrats responsible for that, this is generational theft. We are borrowing from future generations. We are borrowing from people like yourselves that have decades ahead to work. We're borrowing from them. We're putting them in debt for short-term political gain. And the consequences of that will be longer-term, lower economic growth, bigger government control, a bigger part of each of our paychecks going to pay the interest on that, and also the possibility of our dollar being worth far less in the future thanks to longer-term higher inflation.
I think we can sum up your argument then as we need to reopen. That is the best medicine for fixing the economic struggle that we find ourselves in now, rather than all these artificial means. So now we see some Republicans are telling the president that if congressional Democrats don't work with him on these targeted relief programs instead of a larger package, that he should instead take it upon himself to issue them in the form of an executive order. Where do you stand on that debate?
Well, it depends on what the executive orders would be. Unfortunately, there's been a number of executive orders, including the payroll tax suspension and the eviction moratorium, that actually are legally dubious. What Congress needs to do is do their responsibility, which is to legislate. The job of the executive branch is to then enforce the law. We see Congress repeatedly shirking its responsibilities, and the frustration of the president and the executive branch is quite understandable. But we need to see Congress do their job and legislate, and we need to see governors responsibly reopen. Many of these restrictions are draconian, and they are not grounded in data. It is time to begin the reopening process in these communities that are still shuttered. People are eager and ready to re-enter society.
I know myself, I am eager and I'm ready for all these restrictions to come on down. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, Joel.
Thank you.